Story number 1.
The night had fallen early that autumn evening, the kind of darkness that settles quickly when the sky is overcast and the wind carries a biting chill. I was alone in my small suburban home, the kind of house where every neighbor knows your name, where crime feels like a distant story told on the news. My wife was visiting her sister out of town, and my 2 kids were with her. It was just me, the house, and the quiet that I usually enjoyed, but that night felt suffocating. I was finishing up some late work at my kitchen table, my laptop screen the only bright spot in the dim room. Outside, the occasional gust rattled the windows and sent dry leaves skittering across the lawn. Milo, our big golden retriever, was lying near my feet, calm but alert. The clock on the wall read 10:45 p.m. I remember hearing it first, a soft but distinct sound coming from the back door. I brushed it off at first, thinking it was just the wind. But then it came again, a quiet tapping, like a knuckle lightly rapping on glass. Milo growled low, his body stiffening. My heart quickened. I stood and walked slowly toward the kitchen door that led to the backyard. Peering through the small window, I saw nothing but darkness and the wet patio reflecting the dim porch light. No movement, no shapes. I told myself it was probably a branch hitting the window or maybe a stray animal. I locked the door anyway. Returning to my seat, I tried to shake the unease creeping into my chest. 30 minutes later, the power flickered and then went out, plunging the house into darkness. I fumbled for my phone to light my way and checked the breaker. It had tripped. While resetting it, I heard footsteps outside the front door. Slow, deliberate. Not the kind of casual wandering you'd expect in a quiet neighborhood at night. I froze. The doorbell rang once. I didn't answer. Then, from the porch, the front door knob began to jiggle. My blood ran cold. Someone was trying to get in. I grabbed the baseball bat from behind the door, my hands trembling. The knob rattled again. Then came a sharp knock, harder this time, more urgent. I whispered to Milo to be quiet, but he barked fiercely, running toward the door. Suddenly, the door handle turned. The door creaked open just a crack. A man pushed his way inside. He was soaking wet, rain dripping from his hood, bat eyes scanning the dim room. "I don't want trouble," he said, voice low but firm. "Just need to use your phone." I shook my head, stepping back, heart pounding. He stepped fully inside, slamming the door behind him. I backed away toward the kitchen, hoping to find my phone. He moved fast, blocking my path. "Don't make this hard," he said. I thought about running out the back door, but that was locked. Panic surged. I remembered the knife in the drawer. I reached for it, clutching it tightly. The man lunged. We struggled. Milo bit the man's arm, snarling. He screamed and shoved Milo away. I ran to the stairs, yelling for help. He followed, grabbing the bat I had dropped. I pushed him back, swinging the knife again. This time, the man staggered, blood seeping from a cut on his forehead. I locked myself in the bedroom and called 911 on my cell. The operator told me to stay on the line and keep quiet. The man pounded on the door, shouting threats. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, the sound of sirens approached. The man fled through the back door. Police arrived seconds later. They found him a few blocks away, wounded but alive. He confessed to targeting homes when residents were alone. He'd been watching my house for days. That night shattered the illusion of safety in my quiet neighborhood. The fear lingered, but so did the relief that I survived. Story, the end.
Story number 2.
The house was supposed to be my sanctuary, a place where I could leave the outside world behind, lock the door, and feel safe. I had moved in only 6 months earlier, a modest 2-story on a quiet cul-de-sac in a middle-class suburb. The neighbors all seemed friendly, waving as I mowed my lawn, occasionally stopping for a chat. Crime was low here. I knew that, and I believed it. But that belief shattered one cold October night, the kind of night that lingers in your memory for years after. It started innocently enough. I had spent the day working from home, and that evening, my wife Lisa was away visiting her sister a couple of hours away. Our 2 kids were with her. I was alone. I told myself it was going to be a quiet weekend, just me, a couple of movies, and some peace. By 9 p.m., I had turned off all the lights except the living room lamp and the kitchen overhead light. Milo, our golden retriever, was curled up on the couch, his breathing deep and even. I was watching a crime documentary on TV when I heard a faint noise at the back of the house. At first, I thought it was the wind or maybe a branch scraping against the siding. I tried to ignore it, but then I heard it again, a distinct tap on the sliding glass door that led out to the backyard. I paused the show and sat up straighter. Milo's ears twitched. He lifted his head and gave a low growl. I told myself it was probably just a raccoon or some other animal. The backyard was fenced in, but wildlife sometimes got through. I stood and walked over to the kitchen door, pulling aside the curtain to look outside. The yard was dark and still. Nothing moved. I locked the sliding door with the deadbolt and turned on the porch light. The soft yellow glow spilled onto the wet pavement. The rain had started lightly about an hour before. The tapping came again. This time, from the kitchen window. Milo stood and barked sharply. My stomach twisted. I moved toward the window and peeked out. A shadow flitted behind the fence. I grabbed my phone from the counter and dialed Lisa. No answer. I tried my cell. No signal. The power flickered and went out, plunging the house into a deep darkness broken only by the orange porch light. Milo paced nervously by the window. Then I heard footsteps on the back patio. Slow, careful steps. Someone was there. I grabbed the baseball bat from behind the door, my heart hammering. The sliding glass door rattled. I stepped back. Suddenly, the door handle turned. I squeezed the bat tighter. The lock clicked. The door opened just a crack. A man's face appeared. Pale, soaked from the rain, with cold eyes that seemed to pierce right through me. He whispered, "I just need inside, please." I told him no. He pushed harder. The door opened more. Milo lunged, barking ferociously. The man shoved the door open fully and stepped inside. I stumbled back into the kitchen, scrambling for the knife block. He grabbed the bat from the floor and swung. I barely dodged. The bat crashed into the refrigerator. I swung the knife wildly. It caught him in the arm. He cursed and charged. Milo bit his leg. He screamed and tried to kick the dog off. I ran toward the front door, heart pounding. I locked it behind me. Then the man appeared at the bottom of the stairs, wet and furious. I grabbed a heavy cast iron skillet from the stove and hurled it. It struck him on the side of the head. He staggered. I ran upstairs and locked myself in the bedroom. I called 911 on my phone. The operator told me to stay quiet. I could hear the man trying to kick the bedroom door down. He shouted threats and curses. Milo was barking and growling outside the door. The police arrived minutes later. The man fled out the back window and was caught a few blocks away. He was a convicted burglar with a history of violent break-ins. That night, I realized just how fragile the feeling of safety could be. For weeks afterward, I couldn't sleep with the lights off. I installed a security system. I kept the bat and the knife close at all times, but the scars on my mind lasted longer than any physical wound could. Story the end.
Story number 3.
It was supposed to be just another quiet evening in my small suburban home. I had moved into the neighborhood about 6 months prior, drawn by the promise of peace and safety after years of living in a cramped city apartment. My house sat on a modest street, lined with similar 2-story homes, each with its own little garden, and friendly neighbors who waved as they walked their dogs. I liked it here. It felt like the kind of place where nothing bad ever happened. On this particular night, I was alone. My wife had gone out of town to visit her parents, and my teenage daughter was at a friend's sleepover. I was looking forward to some solitude, a break from the constant noise and chaos of family life. After dinner, I settled into the living room with a book and a glass of wine. The only sound was the low hum of the heater and the occasional creak of the house settling. At around 10 p.m., I heard something faint at the back door, a soft scraping noise, like something being dragged lightly across the patio. I paused, trying to convince myself it was just the wind. The sliding glass door to the backyard was locked and the curtains were drawn. I told myself it was nothing and went back to reading. But the noise came again, more insistent this time. My heart started to pound, and I stood up, creeping toward the kitchen window that overlooked the backyard. Peering through the blinds, I saw nothing but the dark outline of the garden and the faint glimmer of the moonlight on the wet grass. No sign of anything unusual. I locked the kitchen door behind me and went to check the other windows and doors. All were secure. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Back in the living room, I tried to focus on the book, but every noise outside made me jump. Then the power flickered once, twice, and went out completely. The house was plunged into darkness, save for the pale glow of my phone screen. I grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen drawer and cautiously made my way to the front door to check the circuit breaker. As I passed the hallway mirror, I caught a fleeting shadow behind me. I spun around, but nothing was there. I reached the breaker box and flipped the main switch. The lights hummed back to life. As I turned to go back to the living room, I heard a loud bang from upstairs, the sound of a door slamming. My blood ran cold. No one was supposed to be home. I crept upstairs, heart hammering in my chest. The hallway was empty. I checked the bedrooms, all locked, except the master bedroom door, which was slightly ajar. I pushed it open slowly. The room was dark, but I could make out the figure of a man standing by the window, trying to pry it open. He was tall, wearing dark clothes and a black ski mask. He looked up and saw me. "Don't scream," he hissed, advancing toward me. I stumbled backward, my mind racing. I grabbed the bedside lamp and swung it at him. It connected with a sickening thud, and he stumbled. I ran down the stairs, calling 911 on my phone. The line was dead. Panic surged through me. I tried the landline, no dial tone. The man was coming after me. I grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter and hid in the pantry, trembling. Through the thin door, I heard footsteps and the soft clink of tools being set down. Suddenly a voice whispered, "I'm not here to hurt you. Just cooperate, and no one gets hurt." I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breathing. He started searching the house, opening drawers, cabinets, pockets, taking valuables. Minutes felt like hours. Suddenly, the front door slammed shut. I heard sirens wailing in the distance. The man cursed under his breath, grabbed a bag, and bolted out the back door. Police officers arrived moments later, finding me shaking in the pantry. They told me the intruder was a local burglar who had been targeting homes in the area. They recovered some stolen items from nearby houses, but never caught him. For weeks afterward, I couldn't sleep without checking every door and window. Every creak in the house made me jump. The sense of safety I once felt in my home was shattered. It was a nightmare I would never forget. Story the end.
Story number 4.
The night began like any other for me. I had just settled in for the evening, the house quiet except for the ticking of the old clock in the hallway and the occasional creak of the floorboards beneath the weight of the house settling. I was alone. My wife and daughter were out of town visiting relatives, and I had planned to spend the night catching up on some reading and maybe watching a movie or two. The neighborhood was peaceful, the kind of place where everyone knew each other's names, and you locked your doors mostly out of habit rather than fear. I had lived in that house for nearly 5 years, and never once had I felt threatened or unsafe. But that night would change everything. Around 10:30 p.m., I was sitting on the couch with a book when I heard something unusual, a faint tapping sound coming from the kitchen window. It was soft and irregular, barely audible, but enough to make me pause and listen. Max, my golden retriever, perked his ears and lifted his head from the floor. He wasn't usually the nervous type, but his body stiffened, and he let out a low growl. I told myself it was probably just a branch knocking against the glass, or maybe the wind playing tricks. I walked over to the kitchen window and peered out, but the backyard was empty and still. I didn't see anything out of place. I closed the curtains and shrugged it off, returning to my book. Max lay back down, but remained alert. An hour later, just as I was about to head to bed, I heard a loud crash from the garage. My heart jumped into my throat. The garage was attached to the house, accessible only through a locked door from inside. I hadn't heard the garage door open, which made the noise even more unsettling. I grabbed my phone to call the police, but noticed the screen was black, no signal. I tried again, no luck. My landline was dead too. The electricity must have gone out. I lit a flashlight and cautiously moved toward the garage door. Max followed, growling softly but sticking close. As I reached for the handle, I heard footsteps behind me on the wooden floor, slow and deliberate. I spun around. Standing in the hallway was a man. He was tall, dressed in black from head to toe, with a ski mask covering his face. His eyes glinted in the flashlight's beam. "Don't scream," he said quietly, but his voice was cold and menacing. I froze. My mind raced. How had he gotten inside? "Where's your family?" he asked. "I'm alone," I whispered. He didn't respond. Instead, he took a step closer, Max barked fiercely and lunged at the man, teeth bared. The intruder swatted the dog away, sending Max sprawling, but not before Max managed to sink his teeth into the man's arm. The man cursed and pulled his arm back, blood dripping from a fresh bite. I seized the moment of distraction and ran to the kitchen, grabbing the heaviest knife from the block. I held it tightly, hands shaking. The man turned and shouted. I heard more footsteps behind him. 2 more men had entered the house. "Get him!" one shouted. I backed into the living room, knife raised, heart pounding. The men spread out, moving like predators. I realized they must have planned this. They had come prepared to overpower me. One grabbed my arm, twisting it painfully behind my back. The knife fell from my grasp. I struggled, trying to break free, but they were too strong. They pushed me down onto the couch and tied my wrists with duct tape they had brought. Max whimpered but stayed close, eyes filled with fear and defiance. The men ransacked the house, looking for valuables. They moved methodically, opening drawers, smashing cabinets, checking closets. I sat helpless, unable to do anything but watch and wait. One of the men approached me, holding a crowbar. "Quiet," he hissed. My mind screamed for a way out. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. Everyone froze. The men exchanged glances. The doorbell rang again, insistent. The leader whispered, "Stay quiet. Don't move." One of them crept to the front door and peeked through the peephole. I held my breath. After a moment, the man returned, shaking his head. "No one's there," he said, but the doorbell rang a 3rd time. This time, Max started barking, loud and ferocious. The intruders looked panicked. Suddenly, the front door burst open. A neighbor, Mr. Jenkins, stood there holding a baseball bat. "What the hell's going on?" he shouted. The men panicked. 2 of them rushed toward the back door, but the 3rd stayed, snarling. Mr. Jenkins swung the bat and connected with the man's head. The man staggered backward, dazed. I took advantage of the chaos and struggled against the tape, finally breaking free. I ran to the door and slammed it shut, locking it. The men outside cursed and tried to force the door, but the sound of sirens soon filled the air. Police arrived, flooding the house with light and order. They arrested the 3 men, who turned out to be part of a gang targeting homes in the area during power outages. I spent the night at the station, shaken but alive. In the days that followed, I changed the locks, installed security cameras, and never felt safe in my own home again. The invasion had shattered the illusion of safety. I still have nightmares of that night, the cold breath of the intruder, Max's growls, the sharp pain of fear. I learned the hard way that danger can lurk anywhere, even where you least expect it. Story the end.
Story number 5.
The day I moved into the old house on Maple Street, I felt an uneasy thrill, like stepping into a story I wasn't sure I wanted to be part of. It was a small 2-story with peeling paint, creaky floors, and a sagging porch swing that groaned in the wind. I'd just landed a new job in the city, and this was the only affordable place I could find. The neighborhood was quiet, almost too quiet, and the neighbors kept their distance. The previous owners had been gone for months, and the realtor mentioned the house had sat empty for a while before I came along. The first week passed in a blur of unpacking and sleepless nights. The creaks and groans of the house kept me awake, but I told myself that was normal in a house this old. I wasn't alone. My dog Max was with me, a golden retriever who never left my side. That was comforting until the night when the noises started. It was about 2 a.m. when I first noticed something off. I woke to the sound of tapping coming from the kitchen. Slow, deliberate. I froze, listening. Max's ears perked up, but he stayed quiet. I strained to hear more, but the sound stopped as suddenly as it had started. I told myself it was just the wind, or maybe a loose shutter banging outside. I got up, checked the locks on every door and window, and made sure Max was settled on the bed beside me. When I finally drifted off again, I had no idea that night was just the beginning. A few nights later, the sounds came back. This time it wasn't tapping, but footsteps, soft but distinct, moving from room to room. I was alone, Max gone to the backyard to relieve himself. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, holding the baseball bat I kept by the door. I called out, but no answer came. I waited, barely daring to breathe. Then I heard a whisper, right outside my bedroom door. It was so faint I almost thought I imagined it, but it was there. Someone breathing, maybe speaking a single word. I grabbed my phone and called 911, whispering my address, and told them I thought someone was inside my house. They told me to stay quiet and wait for officers. The footsteps stopped. Minutes later, I heard the back door creak open. I grabbed the bat and slipped out the bedroom window, running barefoot into the cold night, calling 911 again. The officers found footprints in the mud behind the house, large, booted prints leading into the woods. They said the intruder had fled when I ran out. I stayed with a friend that night. Over the next week, I installed cameras, extra locks, and alarms, but the feeling of being watched never left me. One night, I was home alone watching TV when the power cut out suddenly. The house went dark except for the faint moonlight through the curtains. I heard the front door unlock and open slowly. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911 when I whispering urgently. The footsteps moved toward the stairs. I ran to the back door, heart racing, and slipped out into the cold rain, running down the street to a neighbor's house. The police arrived moments later. The intruder was never caught. I moved out 2 weeks later. The house on Maple Street still stands empty. Some nights, I still wonder who was in my house, what they wanted, and how close I came to a nightmare I barely escaped. Story, the end.
Story number 6.
It was the kind of night where the wind felt like it was whispering something you weren't meant to hear. Leah sat in her small living room, legs tucked under a blanket, her eyes flicking back and forth between her phone and the late-night crime documentary on TV. The narrator's voice was calm, almost too calm, as he described a string of unsolved home invasions in nearby counties. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders and glanced toward the sliding glass door that led out to her backyard. Beyond the thin curtains, the world was swallowed in darkness. Leah had moved into the modest one-story house just 2 months earlier after a bad breakup. The neighborhood was quiet, and the rent was surprisingly affordable. It felt like a chance to start fresh, even if the nights got lonely. She had developed a nightly routine: double-check all the locks, pour a glass of wine, then wind down with something on TV until she felt tired enough to fall asleep. Tonight felt a little off, though. Maybe it was the storm on the horizon. Thunder rumbled in the distance, low and long. The power had flickered a few times, nothing serious, but just enough to make her get up and check the fuse box earlier. She kept her phone charged, a flashlight by her bedside, and a bat tucked under her bed, just in case. She wasn't paranoid, just careful. That's what she told herself anyway. Around 1:15 a.m., she decided to call it a night. As she rose from the couch, she heard something that made her stop cold, a soft creaking sound. It wasn't the house settling. It was too deliberate. She stood completely still, straining to listen. It came again, this time followed by what sounded like the faintest shuffle of feet on carpet. Her heart started to beat louder in her chest, thudding against her ribcage. Every hair on her arm stood up. "Hello?" she called out, immediately regretting it. The silence that followed was almost more terrifying than if someone had answered. She picked up her phone and opened the flashlight app, slowly walking toward the hallway. Her house wasn't big, just a living room, kitchen, 2 bedrooms, and a bathroom. But in that moment, it felt like a labyrinth of shadows and potential threats. She passed the kitchen, scanning it quickly. Nothing. Then she reached her bedroom. The door was open. She was sure she had closed it. Her hand trembled as she reached for the knob, nudging the door open all the way with her foot while keeping the flashlight trained ahead. Her eyes darted across the room. Nothing looked out of place. The closet door was closed. The window was still locked. She stepped inside and flicked on the light. Empty. But then something made her turn. The guest bedroom. She hadn't gone in there in days. She used it mostly for storage. She took a deep breath and tiptoed toward the door. This one was closed too, but she distinctly remembered leaving it open. It always stuck slightly on the hinge, never quite staying shut. Now it was completely closed. She stared at it for a long moment before slowly wrapping her fingers around the knob. Her pulse pounded in her ears. With one swift motion, she yanked the door open and pointed her phone's light into the room. It was empty. No movement, no sound. Boxes, a coat rack, old furniture, nothing unusual. She exhaled slowly, backing away. Maybe she was just psyching herself out. Maybe the wind pushed the doors shut. She made sure to check the front door again, then the back sliding glass door. Still locked, still secure. Maybe it really was just her nerves. She went back to her room and got into bed, clutching her phone like a lifeline. She told herself she'd laugh about this tomorrow, but just to be safe, she slid the bat out from under the bed and set it next to her nightstand. She finally drifted off to sleep sometime after 2 a.m. It couldn't have been more than an hour later when she woke up with a start. Her room was pitch black. The power had gone out. She reached for her phone and turned on the screen. It was 3:12 a.m. That's when she heard it, a click, like a doorknob turning. But not hers. She sat up slowly, holding her breath. Then came another sound, the unmistakable squeak of the back sliding glass door. She had just checked it. Leah grabbed the bat and moved toward the door of her bedroom as quietly as she could. She cracked it open and peeked down the hallway. The living room was lit by faint moonlight spilling through the window, and someone was standing there. A man. He was tall, dressed in dark clothing, face partially hidden by the hood of his sweatshirt. He was standing completely still, as though listening for something. Then he started to move, slowly, silently, toward her hallway. Leah's blood ran cold. She backed into her room and closed the door as gently as she could, heart slamming against her chest. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely open her phone. She tried calling 911. No signal, no bars at all. She turned off the screen and backed into her closet, squeezing in behind the hanging clothes. Her breath was shallow. Her mind raced. She held the bat tight, her knuckles white around the handle. Then she heard the floorboards creak. He was in the hallway. Each step felt heavier than the last. Closer, closer. She could hear him breathing. Then the handle of her door turned slowly. The door opened. She saw the faintest shadow of his figure pass through the slats of the closet. She covered her mouth to keep from gasping. He stood there, just stood. She couldn't see his face, but she could feel his presence, hear his slow, deliberate breathing. Then came a sound that made her blood run colder than she thought possible. He whispered, "I know you're in here." She squeezed her eyes shut, trying not to sob. She couldn't move. She didn't dare. The door to the closet didn't open, but he didn't leave either. Seconds passed like hours. Then she heard footsteps again, slower this time, moving away, back into the hall, back into the living room. Then silence. She waited. 5 minutes, 10, maybe more. Finally, she crept out of the closet, gripping the bat. She peered into the hallway. Empty. She made her way to the living room. No sign of him. The back door was open. Not broken, just open. She ran out into the night barefoot, not stopping until she reached her neighbor's house 3 doors down. She banged on the door until the porch light came on. An older man in a robe opened it, his face turning pale as he saw her. He let her in, called the police. When they arrived, they found no one. No fingerprints, no signs of forced entry, just muddy footprints on her living room carpet. The weirdest part? They weren't there when she first walked into the living room, meaning he'd already been inside before she saw him. The detectives were sympathetic, but could only do so much. With no sign of a break-in and nothing stolen, they didn't have enough to go on. They advised her to stay with someone for a while. She didn't need to be told twice. She packed her things that morning and stayed at her sister's for a few weeks while she looked for a new place. She never went back to that house. Not alone. A few months later, she got a call from the police. They'd caught a man trying to break into a home 2 towns over. Same method. No forced entry, sliding door unlocked, no robbery, just standing in the living room in the middle of the night. When they searched his phone, they found photos. Hundreds of them. All taken through windows. Some from her house, some of her sleeping. She never learned his name. Didn't want to. All she knows is she always locks her windows now. Every single one. And she hasn't slept without a weapon next to her bed since. Story the end.
Story number 7.
It was supposed to be a regular Thursday evening. I had just gotten home from work around 6:30 p.m., later than usual. The early November chill had already set in, and the sun dipped below the horizon before I even turned off my car's ignition. I lived alone in a modest 1-story house in a quiet neighborhood in the outskirts of Raleigh, North Carolina. It wasn't an upscale area, but it was quiet, peaceful, or so I thought. The moment I stepped through the door, something felt off. The air felt a little colder than usual, but I dismissed it as the temperature outside dropping quicker than normal. I locked the door behind me, kicked off my shoes, and flicked on the lights in the living room. Everything seemed in place: TV, bookshelves, even the crooked family photo frame I kept forgetting to straighten. I remember heading to the kitchen to grab a drink. I was standing by the sink, pouring myself a glass of water, when I heard it. A soft click from somewhere behind me. I turned, thinking it might have been the front door, but it was closed and locked like I left it. I peeked into the hallway. Silence. I shook it off as maybe the heater or pipes shifting. Older houses do that sometimes. After dinner, I went through my usual evening routine. Brushed my teeth, showered, changed into sweats, and set up my laptop on the couch to catch up on a few emails. The rest of the house remained dark except for the light in the living room. That's when I noticed my cat, Macy, acting strange. She was staring down the hallway toward my bedroom, unmoving, her tail flicking with agitation. When I called her, she didn't come. She just sat there, low to the ground, like she saw something I didn't. At first, I thought she was just reacting to some random house noise. Cats are weird like that. But then she slowly backed away from the hallway, her eyes never leaving the dark corridor, and eventually slunk under the couch. I felt a cold unease ripple through me. I stood and moved toward the hallway, switching on the light. Nothing there. Bedroom door open, bathroom door ajar, everything still and silent. I checked the bedroom just in case. Nothing looked out of place. Then I saw it. Near the corner of the hallway at the edge of the doorframe was a faint, scuffed boot print. Dirt. It definitely wasn't mine. I hadn't worn boots that day, and I certainly hadn't stepped in mud. I froze. There were only two possibilities. Either someone had been in my house earlier, or they were still inside. My heart pounded in my chest as I stepped backward slowly, careful not to make a sound. I grabbed my phone from the coffee table and went to dial 911. No signal. That was strange. My service never failed inside the house. I walked over to the window, trying to get better reception. Still nothing. The spinning icon on the phone stared back at me. I didn't want to panic, not yet. I moved quickly, grabbing the baseball bat I kept near the front door. I crept back into the hallway, ears straining for any sound, breathing, creaking, movement. Nothing. I turned into the bedroom, bat raised. Empty. The bathroom. Empty. Then I realized I hadn't checked the guest bedroom. I hated that room. It always felt cold, even in summer. I rarely went in there. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open with the bat, heart hammering, and flipped the light switch. Nothing. Stillness. The bed was made. The closet door was open, revealing nothing but a few old coats. I turned to leave, letting out a shaky breath. Maybe I was being paranoid. That's when I heard a sharp creak directly above me. The attic. I hadn't even thought about the attic. The entrance was in the hallway ceiling, just a square wooden panel with a pull-down ladder. I almost never went up there except to toss some old boxes a few years ago. I looked up at it and saw it. Dust disturbed around the panel edges. Freshly disturbed. Someone was up there. My hands shook as I called 911 again, this time moving near the back door where the signal was usually strongest. Still no bars. I was on my own. I made a quick decision and slipped on my shoes. I grabbed my car keys and headed for the front door. I'd get in the car and drive to the nearest police station if I had to. Anything was better than being inside that house. As I reached for the door, I heard something that made me freeze. A soft thud from the attic. Then the creaking of the pull-down ladder beginning to lower, slowly, deliberately. I ran. I didn't even think twice. I sprinted to the back of the house, threw open the door, and bolted outside, barefoot on the freezing concrete. I didn't look back. I jumped into my car, locked the doors, and started the engine with shaking hands. As I backed out of the driveway, I looked up at my roof. The attic panel was now fully down, and someone's head was poking out, just the shadow of it, backlit by the hallway light, watching me. I didn't stop driving until I reached the police station nearly 10 minutes away. When the officers followed me back to the house, the attic was empty. Whoever had been there was gone. But they found signs. Disturbed insulation, footprints in the dust, and a sleeping bag. Food wrappers. A knife. Someone had been living in my attic for at least a few days. They think the intruder got in through the crawl space behind the house and climbed up into the attic through an old, forgotten maintenance hatch. They also found a signal jammer hidden behind the entertainment console in the living room, explaining why my phone hadn't worked. I never went back to that house. I broke the lease and moved into a small apartment in the city. It took weeks before I could sleep through the night without waking up to phantom creaks and imagine breathing from the ceiling above. To this day, they never caught the person. Sometimes I wonder if he's still out there, waiting for another quiet house, another person living alone. Someone like me. Story, the end.
Story number 8.
It was a chilly night in late November when everything went wrong. I had just gotten home from a long day at work, looking forward to a quiet evening alone. My wife was away visiting family for the weekend, and the kids were at her sister's house. The house felt emptier than usual, but I liked the solitude. The street was silent, save for the occasional car passing by, and the autumn leaves rustled gently against the curb. Around 9:30 p.m., I settled into my favorite chair in the living room with a beer and turned on the television. Milo, our golden retriever, lay curled up beside me, his warm body a comforting presence. I was just getting into a movie when I heard it, a faint noise from the back of the house. It sounded like a soft tapping on the kitchen window. I paused the movie and strained to listen. Milo's ears perked up. He lifted his head and growled, low and warning. My heart skipped a beat. I told myself it was probably nothing, maybe the wind or a stray animal. I got up cautiously and peeked through the window. The backyard was dark and empty, the only light coming from the dim porch lamp. I locked the kitchen door and went back to the living room, but the unease didn't go away. Then, about an hour later, I heard the sound again. This time, it was the front door. A faint but deliberate knocking echoed in the silence. I looked through the peephole. No one. The porch light flickered. I whispered Milo's name, and he stood, alert, his tail stiff. Then I saw movement, shadows slipping behind the neighbor's bushes. My stomach clenched. I checked all the locks on the doors and windows, making sure everything was secure. Then the power went out, plunging the house into darkness. I grabbed my phone, but there was no signal. Suddenly the front door handle rattled violently. Someone was trying to get in. I grabbed a baseball bat from behind the door and stood ready. The knob turned. The door creaked open an inch. A man appeared, soaked from the rain, his face half covered by a hood. His eyes glinted in the porch light. He whispered, "Please, I just need help." I told him I was calling the police. He pushed the door open further and lunged inside. I swung the bat and hit him in the shoulder. He cursed and grabbed the bat, snapping it in two. Milo barked fiercely and lunged at the intruder. They struggled on the floor. I ran to the kitchen, grabbed a large knife, and held it ready. The man pinned Milo to the floor and struck me across the face. I stumbled back and fell, the knife slipping from my hand. The man stood, dripping wet, breathing hard. He looked around, eyes wild. I scrambled to my feet and ran to the bedroom, locking the door behind me. Milo limped in after me, whining softly. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. The operator told me to stay calm and quiet. The man started banging on the door, screaming threats and insults. Minutes passed like hours. Then, sirens. The man fled out the back window just as police officers stormed in. He was caught a few blocks away, soaked and shivering, but alive. The officers said he'd been casing the neighborhood for weeks, looking for a house with no one home or vulnerable. That night shattered my sense of safety. For months, I couldn't sleep with the lights off. I installed an alarm system, extra locks, and cameras. But the memory of that invasion haunted me long after the bruises faded. Story the end.
Story number 9.
It started just after midnight, the soft ping of a phone notification dragging me from the edge of sleep. I was lying on the couch in my living room, half watching a rerun of some crime documentary I'd seen a dozen times. The glow of the TV danced faintly across the walls, the only light in the room. I reached for my phone lazily, expecting a text from my sister or maybe a weather alert. Storms had been moving through the area earlier that evening. But it wasn't a message. It was an alert from the motion-activated camera I'd installed above my garage. I tapped the notification. A still image loaded. At first, nothing looked off, just the front of my house, the driveway dimly lit by the single yellow bulb on the porch. But then I saw it. A figure standing just at the edge of the frame. Too far to make out a face, but close enough to see it wasn't just someone passing by. They were facing the house, facing the camera. I sat up slowly, the sleep draining from me. My first instinct was to brush it off. Maybe a neighbor walking their dog or a lost Uber driver. But something didn't sit right. Why would they just stand there? I backed out of the live feed and pulled up the real-time camera view. The figure was gone. I switched to the backyard camera. Nothing. I checked the side yard. Still nothing. My gut clenched. I turned off the TV and sat in silence, listening. The wind outside picked up again, rustling the trees in the backyard, but there was something beneath it. A sound that didn't belong. A creak. It came from the back of the house. Maybe the floorboards. My house wasn't that big. Only a one-story, three-bedroom place I'd inherited from my aunt. I moved cautiously, standing barefoot on the hardwood floor, phone clutched tight. I opened the camera app again and checked the inside security cams. One in the hallway, one in the kitchen. And then I froze. The kitchen camera showed a man standing at the back door. His face was just a blur against the frosted glass pane, but I could see his shoulders, his posture, the unmistakable silhouette of someone trying to look inside. I ducked down behind the armrest of the couch and stared at the screen. He didn't knock, didn't try the handle, just stood there, watching. I reached slowly toward the drawer under the side table and pulled out the small revolver I kept there. My heart thudded painfully against my ribs. I hadn't fired the thing since I bought it. I wasn't even sure I'd be able to pull the trigger if it came to that. A soft tap, tap, tap echoed from the back of the house. I flinched. He was knocking now, but just once. Then silence again. I stayed low and crawled toward the hallway, keeping to the walls. My phone buzzed again, another camera alert. I swiped to open it and felt a rush of blood leave my face. There were now two figures at the front of the house, one standing at the bottom of the porch steps, the other moving toward the side window. My hand was shaking as I dialed 911. The dispatcher answered quickly. I whispered everything I could. People outside, security camera footage, multiple intruders. She told me to stay calm and quiet and that officers were being dispatched. Estimated arrival, 8 minutes. 8 minutes felt like a lifetime. I ducked into the hallway and pressed myself against the wall near my bedroom. My mind was racing. Why my house? I didn't have anything worth stealing. No luxury cars, no expensive electronics, nothing flashy to draw attention. I lived alone, kept to myself. The dispatcher was still on the line, trying to keep me talking. Then I heard it. Glass. Shattering. From the back. My throat closed up. They were in. I crouched by the hallway entrance, watching the kitchen camera. The man had disappeared from the doorframe, but the motion light above the back door had clicked on, flooding the room with pale light. A shadow passed across the floor, then another. 2 of them now. I could hear footsteps, not hurried, controlled, like they knew the layout, like they were confident no one would stop them. I raised the revolver with both hands, barely able to hold it steady. I pressed mute on the phone, not wanting even the dispatcher's voice to give me away. A third alert flashed on the screen. Movement in the living room. No. I turned slowly and peered around the corner. Another man, this one taller, thinner, was standing just past the couch. He had a crowbar in one hand, flashlight in the other. He scanned the room like he was searching for something. Someone. Me. He didn't see me. He moved toward the hallway. Toward me. I backed away slowly, down the hall. I considered slipping into the bathroom, but knew the lock was flimsy. I retreated into the master bedroom and quietly shut the door. Locked it. My heart felt like it might explode. I turned the phone volume back on, whispering to the dispatcher where I was that someone was in the hallway now. Then I heard footsteps outside my door. He was standing there. No knock, no word, just silence. Then the knob turned. Locked. He tried again, harder this time. I raised the gun and pointed it at the door. Then a slam. Wood splintering. He was trying to break in. Again. Slam. I screamed, backing away, tears in my eyes, heart in my throat. Another slam. The door cracked but held, and then sirens outside, screaming tires and flashing lights, shouts. The noise stopped, then running. Heavy footsteps down the hallway, the bedroom door burst open, and for a second I thought he was back. But it was a cop, gun raised. Behind him, 2 more officers rushed past, yelling commands. I dropped the revolver and collapsed to my knees. They got one of them in the backyard. 2 more ran down the street and were caught 2 blocks away. The 4th wasn't caught that night. I gave statements until almost dawn. One of the officers said they'd likely been watching the house for days, looking for routines, picking a time when I'd be alone. They didn't know if the plan was just robbery or something worse. The front and back doors were boarded up the next day. I replaced all the locks, added more cameras. I never slept in the bedroom again. I couldn't. I sold the house a month later and moved in with my cousin across town. But I still get alerts on my phone sometimes, even though the cameras are off, even though no one should be there. Just a still image, the porch, the driveway, and a figure standing just outside the frame, watching. Story the end.